People are still signing up. It takes a while, so bear with us. Everybody's just joined. I see a few familiar names, lots of them. Welcome. We'll start at 3 o'clock or maybe just after, depending on the backlog. Okay, we can start at 3 o'clock. So just sit back, relax. I'm going to give it a few more minutes because the numbers are still just running up, literally the 1 minute until it settles a bit. I think I'll wait. I was going to say I'll wait until it's 150 and then it's 151. 52. Guys, I'm going to start, right? I got the green light from Debbie. Green light is very appropriate on today when it's St. Patrick's Day. So happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody. I hope there's a lot of luck today and we get a bit of the Irish luck in our day and what we're doing. So we're going to welcome all of you very much on behalf of SAICE Transport Division. It's a real pleasure to have this session today, to have so many people attending. We had 370 people or 350 entrants or registrations. And yes, a year ago, so maybe I should just introduce myself. My name is Madeleine Engelbrecht, and I am on the SAICE Transport Division. I have been there for quite a few years. And the people who are with me here are also on the SAICE. We have Johann and Frederick and Debbie from the SAICE Transport Division and Justice from Sunroll. I'll introduce them properly later, but I just want to say thank you to them for their time and contributions for today. So about a year ago, we had our first discussion series. We started this discussion series of the Transport Division, and at that stage, we were wondering what's going to happen in the next 21 days. And then those 21 days were extended by 2 weeks. So we were all at a loss. What are we going to do with what is going to happen with traffic in the next 6 months? How are we going to do transport and traffic engineering studies? And we were speculating a lot. There was a lot of questioning, wondering, how is this going to work? How should transport authorities go about? And should we wait for traffic counts? All agreed, all should wait. But a year later, we're still here. We still have lockdown, and at the same time, there has been lots of speculation as to what has happened and what everybody looks outside their road and make an estimate of it's 50%, it's 70%. But today we're actually going to get the hard facts from real data, from live data. And that's, I think, very interesting. And I'm sure that it's going to be very interesting for a lot of you. So without much further more, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, who is Johann Brunk. Johann is from ITS Engineers, and he started his career in 1999, getting involved with traffic and transportation projects, from large regional studies right through to detailed design of projects. And he also, since then, has gained lots of experience in transport infrastructure projects, from major rural projects through to smaller, from major rural through to local urban roads, from South Africa, Tanzania, Zambia, Nigeria. And very interestingly, he was the RE, assistant RE in the rehab of the N1 through the Toyskloof. Johann has also gained international experience. He was on secondment to Kittelson and Associates in Portland in the USA, where he worked with traffic and transportation planning and engineering studies. So Johann has, I think like most of us, a keen interest in finding sustainable and feasible solutions for public and private clients within this really complex environment that we're working in, the transport space. And Johann, over the years, has successfully completed numerous transport planning, traffic engineering, GIAs, master plans, urban transport projects, public transport development, public transport project, development charges, strategic transport planning, and capacity analysis projects. So Johann has good insight through a lot of data that they're collecting on behalf of Sunroll, and he is going to share this with us today. And I think we're very privileged to have insight into this information. So I'm going to hand over to you, Johann, if you can share your screen, unmute yourself, and thank you. Over to you.
Thanks, Madeleine. Just get this up and running. Alrighty. So you should all be able to see, Madeleine, just confirm so you can see the presentation.
Johann, it's perfect.
Great stuff. Thank you, Madeleine. Thanks for the introduction. Okay, of all those things, we all need traffic counts. Of all those things you've listed, through our, as transport practitioners, we all need traffic and reliable data, obviously, to base our decisions on. It varies from strategic planning to the smallest of extension of a right turn lane. So I looked at my presentation and Justice's presentation, and if you're afraid of graphs, this is going to be a tough ride because we're going to show you a lot of graphs. So I keep your interest. So let's start with the first slide. So what we trying to do is to establish what do we have within our community between road authorities, practitioners, and how can we use it to our benefit to make better assumptions. So I just want to move something out of the way here. And what should we be for the lookout when we're using it? Because every application is horses for courses. We shouldn't just apply blanket percentages to everything. So let's have a look at it. So my presentation deals with, so what traffic data sources we have in South Africa with specific to electronic and continuous data monitoring. Then, it's interesting, as Madeleine said, we went full circle now. So after a year, we can start to compare each month during lockdown with the latest traffic data. Previously, everyone said, are we at 40%? Are we at 60% of, the February data? But now we can actually compare month to month as we go along. And the data we have is obviously on the urban freeway networks. And we also obtained the Western Cape provincial road traffic data. And I'll show you some of that. And then I think we aim to see how can this all assist us. That's the answer we're trying to get to. How can we use this data for projection and estimation of traffic and application in each project? So the question to every transport practitioner the past years, how far are we from normal? When will the normal be? So when will you be normal again? That's a very difficult question to answer. Because travel demand volumes and patterns obviously was drastically changed during the COVID-19 pandemic and very rapidly. But the difficult thing is those changes were as a result of multiple factors, from business operation restrictions to school closures lockdown within your home. And those multiple factors make it more difficult actually to predict or estimate traffic, because all of them has an impact. Some changes are ongoing, and it is uncertain when or if normalcy will ever return, or is this the new norm, as we used to say now? But so the question really we need to answer is, how can projects really that rely on traffic surveys continue? Because we have to continue with our work, and we have to continue with our planning as transport engineers and practitioners. So just to set the scene, this is not really a technical presentation. The data I'm sharing here is to indicate trends in traffic from these sources. So we aim here to understand, traffic trends during the COVID time, and then beyond from today onwards. How can we use this as a guide in going forward? So let's start with, the traffic data I am going to explain this afternoon. There's obviously multiple sources of traffic data, from traffic count stations, VDS data, electronic count stations in the province. But my focus today is from two sources. The South African National Road Agency, as part of their freeway management system, they have vehicle detection systems that continuously monitor traffic volumes on our national freeways. And also the Western Cape government, who has permanent electronic counting stations on their provincial roads. So these obviously provide continuous traffic data over time, which is ideal to establish trends. And that's the purpose what we're trying to look at today. The traffic data forms, as I said, various inputs, or the basis of all these things you say, from safety, infrastructure design to the environment. So it's important that we do understand and traffic counts and how we apply them. Just a quick summary of these two sources. It's more than 200 stations across the country. It is, as I said, continuous. It monitors traffic 24 hours per day, 7 days a week. It also gives us information about the vehicle classification, whether the percentage of heavy vehicles and light vehicles and so forth, as well as the direction of flow. So all these characteristics are per lane or per carriageway of an arterial or a freeway. And in the case of the freeway management system, a big component of that is incident management, which we won't talk to too much in detail today. But the reporting of incidents, and the severities, and et cetera, et cetera. Just a view from where these locations are in South Africa, according to the freeway management system of SANRAL. So we've got predominantly the Gauteng area, including Johannesburg and Pretoria, Durban and Cape Town. That's where the freeway management and the VDS stations are located. So if we zoom in there, in Gauteng, it covers the freeways around Pretoria and Johannesburg, the N1 and the N1 Western bypass, the N3, N4, N12 and the R21. In KwaZulu-Natal, it's mainly around along the N2 and the N3, and then the Western Cape, N1, N2, the R300 that connects the N1 and the N2, and a section under SANRAL's jurisdiction of the N7. The Western Cape government's electronic count station, that's just an extract of the map. It's focused around the metropolitan area where they have provincial roads, but then also it expands to neighboring towns such as Stellenbosch, Worcester, and even Port Elizabeth. The data of the data set that we started to analyze dates back since January 2015, and it was recently updated up to the end of last month. So we've got a good understanding and a good record now of all the traffic volumes along these sections of road. So here starts the graphs. So I'm going to go through them step by step, and I think the importance that I'm trying to convey here is, the difference in all of these data sets, whether it's a combined data set of all the freeways, whether you only look at provincial traffic, do you look at rural and urban traffic, or do you look at a specific station and what that data tells you? And I think the devil is always in the detail. So it's very important then to look at, what's the context you want to achieve, and what information do you want out of the traffic data. This graph, I'm sure most of you are very familiar with or have seen. Let's get there's a pointer out here. So the traffic volumes here, so this is national, the total daily traffic, the average of the total daily traffic of all the stations. So we just combined all the freeway management system, BDS station data together, and looked at, from Gauteng, inclusive of KwaZulu-Natal and the Western Cape, how did the trend, what was the trend that was followed? So this is all pre-COVID, beginning of 2020. And then on the 27th of March 2020, level 5 was introduced into South Africa, and you can see that the average traffic volumes reduced to probably between 90 and 80%. Again, so this is a certain sample size of total traffic volume. So but it gives us the indication of what happened there. And when that happened, obviously you've probably seen these photographs, quite an eerie look, and we never thought we probably will ever see freeways with no vehicles on, but that was the result of the level 5. But it wasn't only in South Africa that this occurred. I just looked at the TomTom index recently, which gave us here, so each dot on this graph represents a city in the world. And what it shows on the vertical axis is the monthly change in the average congestion levels when they compare the 2020 with 2019 data. And what this shows is obviously the first 2 months, and this is obviously now a global trend. This is for pre-lockdown levels, and when people were in lockdown, well, most of the world started to enter into levels of lockdown. So then obviously the congestion level decreased, was reduced, and that's why you'll see a negative percentage there. And then as restriction was lifted or were lifted in the world, each city then started to increase and the congestion level started to appear again. At the end of last year, certain cities or countries imposed again the second wave of COVID pandemic restrictions, and then you can see that's the effect there. So the interesting thing is we're not alone, we're not different to the rest of the world. Globally, cities experience similar traffic trends. So if I look at our country specifically, and this is the summary of only weekdays, so we've excluded weekends, weekday traffic, the average of every day. You can see the purple line here is for the Gauteng province, the blue line there is the Western Cape, and the green is the KwaZulu-Natal VDS data, and the black one here is the sum total of them all. So what we first did here was to look at, some average level pre-COVID, and that's the red line there. So the 2020 timeline here, and these percentages that you will see now, compares with that baseline or that pre-COVID traffic volume, so that we can see, what the impact of different stages of lockdown levels were. as I said at the beginning, so now that we entered 2021, we can actually compare the corresponding month of the previous year, of the 2020 during lockdown. And I think that gives great value to it, because then we compare apples with apples, because we got, seasonal variation is then excluded from the data comparison. So you'll see here now, as this flows or moves, there's traffic data missing in the Gauteng, and that's why there's a dip there. But after lockdown 5, it increased to about 40%, and it steadily increased up to about 72% of compared to the pre-lockdown levels. Certain these marks here you can see is when there's public holidays. And then at the end of stage 3, it almost entered into between 90% of percentage of traffic volumes. And interesting, the difference between stage 2 and 3, relatively constant traffic volumes during this time. By the end of last year, we entered the second lockdown period into lockdown from 1 to 3, and that reduced the traffic right just before level 3 back to 70%. And again, you can see here the caution of just using averages and just summarizing traffic data of what you receive. So there was obviously faulty stations in this period, which obviously brings the average down in this case, or the sum total. Where we are now, we are very close to, from this data set, very close to the pre-COVID levels in terms of freeway traffic volumes across the country. Some freeways or some areas are lower and some areas are higher than the pre-COVID areas. So again, the caution of representing or of taking an average of a percentage and apply it to general calculations is difficult. So considerations to take into account is what I said, careful when adding all the volumes. And the location is very important. It depends on what are you investigating, or what are you trying to get the traffic volumes from. How is the land use surrounding that station will be affecting the traffic data. Obviously, the daily variation, because most of the counts includes weekends. So, and normally when we do TIAs, we're looking for the typical weekday and the peak hour, which I'll address right now, and the seasonal variation. You need to be aware of, like in June, we've got lower traffic volumes generally in South Africa than at the end of the year during summer months. And as I showed, the maintenance of stations, or when they're faulty, you need to be aware of them so that you can adjust for those. So the following graphs are focused on the Western Cape government electronic stations, where I'm going to show you some comparisons between different stations. This is similar to the freeway management system slide, where we've added all the station data together. And here it's a nice illustration of seasonal variation or yearly variation of traffic volumes since February or since 2019. The graph shows the average daily total, and it includes urban and rural areas. And you can see as the traffic increases towards the end of the year, this is typical of traffic volumes at the year-end closure at the end of December and January. Increases, lowers through July months or the winter months, and then steadily increases towards the end of the year, and then the cycle repeats itself. So it started to repeat the same pattern until COVID, and this is where we start to look at the comparison now, is how it increased up to the end of the year. That's the typical variation, normal with or without COVID lockdown, you can expect the same patterns here. But what this shows us, for a typical weekday in February 2019, similar, there was some growth on the provincial road network in this case, from 14,000 to 16,000. And then where we are today is about 15,000. So we below what we were in 2020, but at a very close order of magnitude. But that's the generalized sums we've made by adding all the traffic of all the stations together. So I just want to illustrate here, if we start to look at specific stations, you start to see different outcomes. This station is at the Huguenot Plaza. So it represents traffic that enters Cape Town, definitely regional traffic and also inclusive of freight traffic between the provinces. And if we look here, in February 2019, very constant traffic through the tunnel when we compare the different months of the year, and where we are currently in 2021, very similar, slightly lower, but it's in the same order of magnitude at this specific station. When we look at another station, obviously at the airport, because I tried to see the great variations in the traffic data, and the airport should illustrate that clearly. So this is at a station at the airport approach road to the Cape Town International Airport. Since February 2019, traffic volumes again remained relatively constant, comparing the same month of consecutive years. Then after lockdown, and the impact of air travel is clearly to be seen in this, where we haven't reached the same level of private vehicle traffic in this case, or vehicular traffic. We are about 55% of previous years. This station illustrates, the difficulty when we have freeway traffic and we're trying to understand suburb level of the street network, the traffic impact on those streets, because the freeway obviously carries different types of traffic, and it's not always representative of the neighborhood streets. So in this case, where we do have access to the Western Cape government station, they do have provincial roads traversing towns, and in this case you can see this is in Paarl, where the traffic actually increased year on year from 2019 to 2020, and at the moment we actually has an increase since 2020, pre-COVID lockdown traffic volumes. So where one station clearly shows a reduction in traffic compared with pre-COVID times, it's a result of the type of traffic and the attraction on that specific road where the detection is being monitored, or where the detection is done. But I think a better way of showing these comparisons is when we compare the same week of every year of different years and compare the same week with on a graph like this. So this is a typical station at Croydon, where it's again a provincial arterial road that goes through a town, but it's en route to the N2. So what you see here is the light blue line is 2019 traffic volumes. The dark blue is 2020 with the result of COVID. And then the orange line represents the latest 2021 traffic volumes. So in this instance, you can see that we approach the same levels of traffic volumes for the same week compared to 2020 and 2019 traffic volumes. When you look at another station like Polka Drive, the M12, which is a provincial arterial that links the Cape Town region with Stellenbosch, totally different picture, where you can see that the 2021 traffic volumes are not near the levels that we've seen in 2020. And a possible reason for this is likely to be, that the universities are not fully reopened because so student traffic is not included in this. And maybe the change in regional traffic between towns has decreased, and that could be the new normal, that people do not need to travel for business between, like we have meetings through Teams and all those kind of factors. The next two slides compares rural stations with urban stations. So that's another consideration we have to take into account, is to see, how the traffic in rural areas reacted or recovered. And in this case, you can see this is all the rural stations that we've plotted, where the current traffic volumes are lower than the previous years. And if you look at the urban side within the network, it's clearly that, we're still not at 2020 levels, but we've passed the 2019 levels within the urban metropolitan areas of the Western Cape stations. But comparing the same time period on these graphs obviously gives us a better understanding of the seasonal variation too, because you're comparing apples with apples. Then for TRAs, we're not interested in, well, not interested, but we focus on peak hour traffics. All these graphs that I've shown here are total daily traffic. But the data also, because it's continuous, it gives us indications, it gives us data for peak hours. So this graph shows you 2019 in March, which is this graph here. That's the normal pre-COVID peak hour distribution of typical Wednesdays of May 2019. If we compare that with the month of April 2020, you can see definitely the impact of the level 5 lockdown and also the curfew time. So you can see that's 5 o'clock in the morning where there's 0, and it started to increase. It flattened relatively constant throughout the day, so there's very little inter-peak, very few peak hour traffic volumes. And then here you can also see the effect of the curfew at night. Another station here as an illustration of peak hour traffic. The light blue line here is the 2019. The darker one is the 2020, and this reddish color here is the latest 2021 traffic. So what this peak hour traffic distribution shows here are for the same month of February for each of the years, 2019, 2020, and 21. So in this case, the peak hour has not reached the peak hour levels of the previous years, and the same for the interpeak. But when you look at a different station, this is that one in Paarl, within the residential area, you can clearly see here that even the 2021 peak hours has increased past the 2019 and 2020 peak hour levels. Similarly for the interpeak. So that just shows you general traffic growth in that area. Some stations do give us another picture of peak spreading. Here, the orange line represents February 2020, and the green line here shows you February 2021. You can see slightly delay in or later peak, start of the peak hour. a continuation, higher continuation throughout the day, and then an earlier end of the peak hour now in 2021. So I think what I want to convey here is that each station represents different traffic patterns and would give you insight of that typical traffic that in that area and that uses that road. Something we looked at, and I'm certain this is not representative of school traffic, but if you look at the Western Cape government's traffic data, I just thought let's plot all of them and look at the 15th of February and to see how traffic reacted to just the opening of schools, because everyone said, make the comment, so, but it still excludes school traffic. Obviously, school traffic is not on the provincial roads, but I think it's a matter of looking at it. Have we reached normality, since the schools has reopened? And what it shows to me here is that there's no significant indication of the effect of schools on the current traffic volumes on the provincial road network. But if you look at in Gauteng, we looked at the station here on the N4, close to Brumeria. These are on February 2021, and that's the 16th of February, and a significant increase in traffic. So again, I'm not giving you detailed answers, but this is indications of, it depends on where that station is, how close it is in proximity of schools, and what the data gives you in relation to that. So when we need to estimate traffic volumes, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Everyone globally has the same issues. This four-step approach comes from Kittleson and Associates in the United States, and I thought maybe I can share this with you. So the first thing that we need to decide is in what context are your project, or is your project, and what type of analysis do you need? Are you looking at segments, facilities, corridors, etc.? And what modes do you need will be affected by the project? Do you need to have vehicular traffic, freight traffic, pedestrians, etc.? And then what type of data is required? Will origin destinations be affected by the project? Do you need that type of information? The second step is coordinate. And I think we've over the past year increased this effort significantly. We start to talk to road authorities because they have plenty of case studies, similar type of applications, and also access to other data where they have household surveys and public transport surveys, which can be shared and give you a better indication of how to apply that to your count that you've done during COVID or pre-COVID times. The third step is then, how to apply your data sources, or where to obtain them. Typically, there are two: the external observed data source, which includes traffic counts and surveys, or user-generated data sources, which includes probe data or tracker data or connected vehicle data. And those can be used either independently, or you can combine them to give you a better result. Then the last step is to make that adjustment and make an estimation of what is realistic from the data you obtained. So to adjust the observed data, normally that is not applicable to trip distributions, but you use that to scale your data, either to the same time of the year, if you need to have a different month in the year, to look at the different scaling factors, or you can adjust the user-generated data, which is to estimate travel pattern changes. And there you have to do scaling because the data of user-generated data is obviously only a sample size of the total demand. So, in conclusion, our transport profession has benefited and has built on sound engineering judgment since we started, and combined it all with innovative ideas and approaches, and nothing prevents us of keep on doing that. The external, we can use the external data sources as well as the user-generated data, which is much more available today. All this data I've showed you is available from Sunwell and the Western Cape government. But the application should rather be specific rather than a generalized application. And I hope I've shared those differences between the electronic stations clearly. But we as transport practitioners have always estimated. So because every capacity analysis of an intersection is in fact an estimation which is based on multiple adjustment factors like the saturation flow of an intersection, etc. So we've done it always. So we should just be in the process of applying proper data and do a proper estimate of what we're trying to get out of the traffic data. Capacity additions generally increases your estimate uncertainties, ensures it, because, for instance, if you add a right turn lane to a traffic signal, only that capacity increase will likely increase the vehicular hourly flow from 700 almost to 1,000 vehicles. So that already creates additional capacity for your probably for your percentage underestimation of traffic volumes. Just because we are not normal yet, or maybe we are at the normal yet, it should definitely not prevent us from keep on doing projects, because it's critical for our economy and to keep this country growing. But again, I think that's the end of my slides. It's been a mouthful and I've probably rushed way too fast through them, but hopefully it was clear enough.
Thank you, Johann. That was very, very, very insightful. And you've touched on all the sort of questions that I think anybody could have had with all the information you have. What are the big contributors to what affects the data, and what do we see? Where are we? Are we back to normal? Are we going to be back to normal? What has the schools done? All those questions have been answered. So there was one question in the chat, is to say, when will there ever be a time when we are normal? And I think you've said that we actually are all, we're normal in most instances already. But my question was maybe to say, taking that question further, is there somewhere specifically to do with this working from home, where you've seen where one's seen the impact of the working from home? And we need to keep it relatively short because we're almost at 20 to 4 already. So if you can just have a quick response to that.
When we started to look at the data, I anticipated, these peak spreadings, that people do not travel during the peak hours anymore because we are working from home and we start later, or we can work from home, but then generally go back to the office later during the day because we are fortunate to do that. But I think what the data shows us, that's the small percentage of the traveling population. Most people still have to be at a certain time at work. I wish we could have changed it, because we've seen the impact on congestion, huge impact at the beginning. And hopefully, I wish we could have done it, more permanently. But the data definitely shows that, the peaks are getting in the same order of magnitude.
Okay, great. I'm going to thank you for that. I'm going to move on. Can people keep typing questions, technical questions, let's call it that, in the Q&A? At the bottom, you'll see there's a Q&A thing. And any other hellos or whatever, you can continue to type in the chat as you have been doing. That's perfect. Our next speaker is Justice Jahoki, and he's got a wingman, Alan Robinson, both from Sunroll. Justice is going to lead the presentation, but he will be supported by Alan, who's just joined the panel. Alan was in another session that he had to join in late. So welcome, Alan. If you two can turn on your videos, and so long while I introduce you and get yourself unmuted and ready with your presentations, that'll be great. So Justice is a traffic engineer at Sunroll now. Before he joined Sunroll, he was doing planning and traffic engineering for various consultants, and with a very specific interest in modeling and data and traffic master plans, traffic impact studies, NMT, public transport, all of those. He gained a lot of experience working in South Africa, but also in the UK, the United Arab Emirates and New Zealand, as well as projects. This is where he's lived and worked, and he's done projects in around the continent of Africa, from Ethiopia right through to Ghana. He's got a BTEC in transport engineering, and he's done a master's in GIS from Manchester University, and he's busy, he says, with his master's at UCT in transport studies at the moment. Alan Robinson is also with Sunroll, and he's been there since 2015 already. Can you believe it? And he has other way around. He has 32 years of experience as a consultant, mainly previously working in government, but also with private sector clients, private and public sector clients. So Alan holds a BSc and a graduate diploma in engineering, as well as a master's from UP. And he's a general traffic specialist, specifically in traffic engineering and modeling, and has done some protocols for the use of big data sets to get some origin destination data from number plate surveys and so on. So I think we are in interesting hands here, and I really want to, just without using more time, go over to you, Justice, and ask you to present. Thank you. Can you turn on your video? There we go. We can see you. Hello.
Hello, everybody. Thanks, Marilyn, and thanks, Alan, and everybody in attendance. It's such an honor to be presenting today. We are reviewing traffic patterns through the COVID-19 pandemic, and similar to what Johann has done, we are going to look at the traffic data that we have comparing pre-COVID pandemic. In my case, the baseline is 2019, and we'll be comparing it with the current traffic data. I will be using the toll plaza traffic data in this analysis, similar to what Johann has done, but mine strictly looking at the traffic. And I've already violated number one rule of Johann, which is averaging. So I will be averaging through, and then we can take discussion later. Without any doubt, COVID-19 has had a very significant impact on our lives, and especially on how we travel. And we had to come up with coping mechanisms to try and deal with it, and still continue to do some bit of work. So there have been travel behavior changes, even though they are temporary. We'd like them some of those to continue, because there are benefits to the changes in travel behavior. And like I said before, we'll be using the toll plaza traffic data. As a caveat, this data is on high mobility roads, which are class 1. So yes, there are areas where you'll have a little bit of commuter traffic, but predominantly these are inter-regional long distance traffic that we are reviewing today. We all know the family meetings and the lockdown. Skip on that. This shows the 2019 traffic data. What I am showing here is the sum of all the traffic through the plazas that are excluding the concessionaires and the Huguenot tunnel throughout the country. And as you could see, the numbers are not that important, but it's important is that there are variations within a month. I think we normally call this seasonal variations. You would see in January, the year started off, things were picking up, people returning to from holidays and starting to get to work. So January was, in this case, was our third highest month. And in February, the lowest, it's much shorter, so there's less travel. March, around the Easter season, tends to be higher as well. It was the second highest of the year. And then you have December, where everybody leaves Gauteng and goes to all different places, holidays, visiting family and friends. So December is traditionally the busiest month throughout Toll Plaza, and that's what shows. So we were actually following the trend in January and February, in that traffic was marginally increasing at about 2% in January, year on year, if you compare the same month. And also in February, you saw about 3% increase compared to the previous February. So things were looking out to turn out as normal, but it wasn't to be. COVID happened. And on the 27th of March, we went into lockdown. And the time that was supposed to be traditionally the second highest month of the year, actually plummeted by about 80% to about 20 to 25% of traffic. As lockdown levels were adjusted, we started seeing some improvement in the traffic curtains. We went up to 50% during level 4, and things started improving. So again, in March or in April, in this case, it was about 23% that was during a hard lockdown. Then we went to about 51% of 2019. Please note again that when I'm comparing this, I'm not comparing to the previous month or whatever. I'm comparing to the same month in 2019. So that's what the percentages are telling you. So up to level 1, we managed to get to around 93% or 90% roundabout of baseline traffic. So we do seem to be returning to some sort of normality, but we're still overall below the levels that we've seen in 2019. The relaxation of the lockdown levels have made things easier. But sometimes even before lockdown changes, if you compare November, December, you feel the trend going downwards. I mean, in December, the lockdown was on the 29th, which was almost month end, but you already seen the decline from 92% in October down to 91% and 88%, because people were making changes even before lockdowns with a revised lockdown level was introduced. When we're looking at heavy goods vehicles, that's a very important part on the network. People love to complain about them, but they've also seemed to have experienced a similar effect or similar reduction, but the impact on heavy vehicles was not as big as it was on light vehicles. Again, taking an example in April, where light vehicles went to 25% of 2019 levels, heavy vehicles only went to about 50% or so of 2019 levels. And they soon quickly recovered to within 90 to 100% of 2019 levels. So heavy vehicles have almost returned to the baseline 2019 traffic volumes, but the light vehicles are still recovering. We don't have a lot of data in 2021 because we only have 2 complete months, but what it has shown is we're now, I think we're still in level 3 in January and February, and now we're back to level 1 in March. But it shows similar trends to what we have seen. So what have we seen? In level 5, we had lockdown. we've seen traffic reducing by over 75% month-on-month comparison or year-on-year comparison of the same month. Level 4, it was almost 50% reduction. Level 3, it was about 30% reduction. Level 2, it was about 20% reduction. In level 1, it was about 8% reduction. And then when we went to adjusted level 3, we were now about 87%. So please note that the adjusted level 3 is much higher than the original level 3. The original level 3, we were at 71% of 2019. In the adjusted level 3, we were at about 87% of 2019. So people are finding ways to cope with the restriction, and they're more at ease with how they want, and we see them getting back to what they, to the level that we've seen even before lockdown. So in a nutshell, I remember from the first webinar that we did in about a year's time from here, we were more or less predicting that these kind of things will happen. And to quote Alan Robinson, for example, I think he estimated that we're going to see this similar sort of trend. So the recovery is there, it's happening. We are seeing changes in the traffic patterns back to some sort of normality. And whether this will continue to be sustained or whether we'll continue to see this is a question for discussion. So another topical issue was the closure of borders. So to give you my initial estimates when the question of border closures was asked, I would have thought it will have a significant impact on the traffic going through the plazas that are going towards the borders. But what did the data tell us? We did this comparison by selecting the N1 North section of the road network and comparing Nail Plaza and Baobab. Baobab is very close to Bay Bridge, so we thought it would represent or it would be a perfect candidate to represent the impact of border closures. If you look at Nail Plaza, in level 5, it was about 80% impact. It was down to about just under 20% of 2019 levels. In level 4, it was down to 50%. Level 3, it ranged between 60 and 70%. Level 2, it was about 76%, and then it went to 93%, and then leveled off the year around 91%. How does it compare to Baobab? Baobab was actually surprisingly a bit better. It was 35%, down to 35% in level 5 compared to 19% on Nail Plaza. And then it started basically climbing up or recovering up to about 95% of 2019 traffic around November. So Baobab has actually done surprisingly well. But if you look at the graph, the two graphs at the top, and then you look at the heavy vehicle composition, so the orange, gray, and yellow bars on the graph that represent class 2, 3, and 4, and those are heavy vehicles. So that stayed almost constant in relative terms between 2019 and 2012, and it was the same or similar trend if you compare Nail Plaza and Baobab. But in Baobab, the composition of those vehicles is much greater. It's almost a third of the total traffic. And because that has not changed, the main change was on the light vehicle. And hence the impact on that was not so significant. It's because heavy vehicles have got much bigger influence going through that. And they were still allowed during lockdown or border closures. That's one of the things that we could deduct from here. So traffic engineers, we're more interested in the peak hour and the impact that that will have. So we also assessed or took two. I think in this case, I'm only giving one example, but we assessed two examples. I think it was Marine Hill Toll Plaza and Otangati Toll Plaza. These relatively have high commuter traffic composition. Marine Hill between Pietermaritzburg and Durban, it's quite a busy corridor. So we thought maybe this will tell us the picture of what happens during the peak. This information that we're looking at is hourly data for the whole year, which is aggregated by different periods of the year corresponding with the lockdown restrictions. So in this case, representing level 5, we're looking at April. So it's April 2019 in blue versus April 2020 in orange. We see massive drop in traffic, both in the peak hour and in the intra-peak. Similar to the daily trends, we are about, excuse me, so it was about 80% reduction in that, and then the traffic was more evenly spread throughout the day between the peaks. In May, which represents level 4, we saw some improvement in traffic, and then the traffic reduction as compared to 2019 was reduced to about 50% on daily basis and about 46 or 40% in the AM, PM peak respectively. And during the inter-peak period, there was a slight drop after this AM peak, but traffic started climbing up towards the PM peak. In level 3, taking June as an example, you started seeing further improvement in traffic volumes, with traffic getting to about 70% of 2019. That's about 30% reduction. And also in the AM and PM. And then the AM you started seeing some spreading of the AM peak during that time. The PM peak still there was not that much spreading also. And then lockdown levels reduced to level 2. This one is in September. Can you remember that the announcement was, I think there was a change around the 22nd of September. So we only took that period in September up to the day where the announcement was made. I think that was around the 20th of September roundabout. And this one, in that period of days, we saw traffic reducing to about 88% of what we observed in 2019. And the similar trends in the AM and PM, but what you are seeing is more peak spread in level 2, and the traffic was a bit was more flatter. During the inter-peak, actually some hours were recovering to almost 100% of the levels observed in 2019. So there was recovery, and there was also a lot of activity in between the peak hours, probably due to flexibilities that are associated with the various things that are happening, including school closures and flexible work time regimes. But still, people were returning back to work physically. In level 1, we saw traffic recovering to about 94% on daily basis, and about 92% on if we look at the peak hours. And for some instances during the inter-peak, actually 2020 was higher than 2021. The inter-peak period is a lot flatter. There's a lot more peak spreading that we've observed. So that's what we possibly need to look at. So if we're looking at recovery and returning back to normal, level 1 is more likely to be the closest thing to normal that we can see. So the question is it sustainable? Are some of the things that we've seen improve in level 1, can we carry them forward to the next year or so? Again, just a slide, I've already talked about that, just a summary of what we observed. So 23% in level 5, down to 50% in level 4, 70% in level 3, about 88% in level 2, and about 94% in level 1. And in conclusion, lockdown has no doubt had an impact on our lives and travel. In level 5, everything except essential travel was not allowed. Schools were closed, borders were closed except for freight vehicles. There were nighttime restrictions, and a combination of all of this resulted in about 75% reduction in traffic on the regional transport corridors. And we're seeing gradual easing of lockdown, and level 1 we at some point went to about 94% of 2019. And yeah, so the cross-border or the border closures was one thing which we didn't find that the results were representative of what we thought, but again, that just humbles us, and sometimes better to tend to change how we think, and we start with a certain mindset and it proves otherwise. Schools has been a big thing. With the closure of schools, we've seen parents being more flexible. One speaker has once described that parents have been reduced to shuttle drivers or chauffeurs of their children to school in most instances, and we're seeing that actually children are dictating more of when people need to be on the road, and when the burden of driving the children around to school is removed, people can make decisions, people can make choices. Online tools that we have had reduce the need for some travel, but not everything. As was mentioned earlier, majority of the people still need to go to work, like healthcare, support services, maintenance, construction, and all of those kind of jobs cannot be done remotely. So there are a lot of people in our economy that still need to go to work. So we in the professional services, we are the exception to this rule. But even if it's just those people who have the flexibility to do their work, if they can do that, it's every little bit helps. Thank you.
Thank you, Justice. That was certainly, again, brilliant, very, very interesting. I'm going to just ask you one question, and then I'm going to put all the panelists on the screen. Could you just unshare your, or maybe keep it up in case there's something you want to respond. So the one thing I saw that you differentiate between light and heavy vehicles. Do you at all have information about public transport vehicles? Is it at all possible to get it from the data to see if there's been a change in numbers of public transport vehicles?
Unfortunately, no. We only know that it's a light vehicle. Maybe with a G6, you may be able to go into that level of detail. And also there's a class 2, class 3, or class 4 vehicle. So we can't tell at the moment that it's a taxi or a bus. So we can't tell of like shift in mode of people. We can only, from the data, tell you that there is a reduction in this sort of travel.
Okay. It's a shame. It's a bit of a gap, I think.
Johann,
Johann, can you put on your video as well? I'm going to just ask some of the questions that have come through in the Q&A, and guys, please keep sending questions. The one question that was asked by Stefano Dia is, when we look around ourselves, and I know, for instance, Jan Kutsia the other day flew over Johannesburg and looked out and thought traffic wasn't as much as it is. Our anecdotal experience makes us feel that traffic is reduced, yet these numbers show something else. Do you think there's been a displacement of traffic to motorways? Have you got any comments on that?
I wish I had more time to investigate this, but I believe that 10% difference from where we are currently to previous traffic levels is probably the turning point where freeways starts to deteriorate from the, your normal flow and speed curves. So we're very close. We're reaching those levels probably again, but that 5 to 10% is that turning point where you all of a sudden probably will experience congestion again on the freeways. I'm speculating because I haven't done the analysis of that, but that's my view, probably a reason for it.
It could be that there's less what we call rat running possible. It's possible.
Yeah, because the freeways are flowing, so people take the arterial because it has its function of mobility at the moment.
Yeah,
so
I'm getting. Sorry, I was interrupting you. I want to get to Alan as well, but I wanted to just quickly ask a question to Justice before I'm going to ask you, Alan. Do you measure speeds as well? And are you just sort of relating to Johann's question? Do you measure speeds as well? Do you monitor that?
Yes, we do measure speeds on our CTO stations. But for this analysis, I did not look at speed. But yes, we do measure speed.
I was thinking of the good old speed flow curve diagram to see maybe we're falling somewhere else on it. Alan, over to you. You look very ready to respond to this question.
It is. We're sitting in a situation where we're looking at.
Just check your sound. We can hear you, but not so well. We want to hear you better.
You can get a closer look at the map.
Can everybody else mute?
Yeah, we're sitting. I think we're sitting on that cusp of standard speed flow curves, especially on freeways where we run very well until we start hitting capacity. And as soon as we hit that capacity, your deterioration is rapid. Along arterials, that deterioration happens at a more gradual rate as traffic flows increase. So with that, we're still running at about spare capacity on the freeways. It does attract a lot more. It's still a better way to get around. And as soon as that demand is taken up and we start getting that breakdown in flow on the freeways, you'll see the arterials start to fill up with rat running and all sorts of things, back to normal. Yeah, and okay, I'll leave that question. I'll happy to answer some of the others as well. Madeleine, now you're muted.
So I'm going to ask a lead-on question to that, which is this thing about the traffic having dipped, be sitting at about 80-something%, in some places back at 100%, but where we are about 80%. Have you, if you tracked it all, the link with the GDP growth, or looking, I mean, for me, it's about, okay, we know now what we know. What do we do looking forward? How do we help ourselves with all this information looking forward? What do you see with the link with GDP? If you were to say, I know you were, according to Justice, you were very accurate when you made a prediction a year ago. So ask Alan if you want to know. So what do you want to respond in terms of GDP, traffic volumes, looking at the future? Any ideas?
Yep. Okay. Again, if you look at the trends of GDP and traffic growth, in 2008, there was a massive dip in traffic. In 2009-10, it grew faster than normal to get back to a standard trend line. There was another dip more recently, and it's bounced back. So if you look at GDP on a quarterly basis, you see this bouncing around all the time. What is also noticeable is there has been, over the last, excluding 2020, from about 2014, there has been a slow decline in GDP growth year on year, and traffic is following that trend. This approximate 6 to 7% drop that we had in 2020, I think that's also going to, it's difficult to say over 1 or 2 years, but it's going to rebound. There's no doubt. I mean, it will come back, and traffic will do the same thing. And I think there's going to be a couple of years of much higher growth than year-on-year growth to catch up. And by the time we get to 2025, 2030, or even beyond, if we're designing for 20 years, 2040, 2020 is just going to be a blip on a graph. It's going to be an outlier. So if you're doing long-term forecasting, just ignore 2020. Hopefully, we come out of this in the next couple of months, and there may be a little bit of rebasing, but 95%. And I think something Johann said, as traffic engineers, we're dealing with a lot more assumptions that have a lot more potential error than that 5%. So, I mean, my view is just be logical, just be mindful of what you're doing. Don't take, you've got to be very careful when you're doing numbers. Like you ask the question, can I do a count now? Well, yeah, of course you can. And that's probably the most accurate data you're going to get. But the question is, what do you do with it? And now you're going to throw in a few assumptions that, will bounce it around a bit. And as long as it's based on something else, you can't go too far wrong. Just my input on that.
Engineering judgment. Yeah, I guess bringing it back to robust design. Johann, do you want to comment on?
Yeah, so I think Alan is spot on. I mean, the economy has shrunk by, I think, 7%. Right? So you would expect, there would be a recovery period, and hopefully we will experience that. And history has shown us that, that recovery, when it, as Alan said, it goes back to normal and exceeds the previous percentages. I think I've mentioned it to you earlier, if we apply assumptions to data, for example, when you have data of, say, 2019 or early 2020, or say 2018, 2019, you already apply a growth rate of an annual growth rate of, say, generalized 3%. That 3% exceeds the growth of 2020 that we experienced. So you almost, to an extent, overestimate your future traffic, or for your current traffic. I think that margin of error of 5 to 10% is within, acceptable terms. It depends. Again, sorry, it depends. Again, what your focus of the project is. I have to, it depends if you're strategically looking at it, or if you need to understand, you need to be exact, because if you do a feasibility of a filling station, you need to be certain, what the pump is, as an example.
Yeah, I think your message today was, it depends. It depends. Yeah. Alan, your hand is up.
Yeah, I think just got to be careful.
Your sound again?
Just got to be careful. And just be wary of what we call optimism bias. If you're trying to prove that a filling station is required, don't take a 2019 figure in one place, pick some factor somewhere else and apply it, and you find that this thing is going to be a booming success. You could come horribly short. You just got to be very pragmatic and sensible. The art of engineering, especially in this profession. And effectively, what you've got to be able to do is put the data down, show that it's unbiased, show a logical sequence of thinking to come up with a result that you can defend. I have in recent times come across forecasts which are clearly wrong, yet they have used factors from one place and applied it to another. The result is clearly wrong. And they basically can't defend it. So as long as you can defend it, the chances are nobody's going to argue. Thank you.
Yeah, sound advice. Just as a bit of a philosophical question to you, but to me, this looks, when I look at the data that I've seen today, this was a phenomenal TDM, travel demand management experiment.
Yeah.
What have we done to capture it? Or do you think it's too late? Anything we could learn from it? I know it's a difficult one if somebody else wants to respond as well. But
I think we missed an opportunity during 2019 to collect lots and lots of data. And it would have been nice to be able to collect that data on arterial roads, on local roads, and everywhere to see what the impact of these things are, to interview people and understand why it is that they change the times of travel, why it is that they make certain decisions. When do you decide whether to work from home or from the office? And I think collecting data allows us to be able to start drawing some lessons from that and saying that, like, this is one set of data that is presented today, which is from the freeway management system. And have other consultants, for example, collected data during certain times? Is there comparative data in the same month or week in the previous year that they can compare to, who start drawing lessons? But what we have seen is that TDM helps with the capacity of the system. That 6% drop in the demand, if you take it to 40 years horizon, or 20 years horizon, or 30 years that we work with, it could be the difference between adding 1 or 2 lanes. So it helps. There's economic benefit, and if we can get people to change, even if it's 2% of the people that can change their travel behavior, it will help. And we should try and actually, maybe in summary, what COVID has done, if you take all of those 20 years of theory in terms of the impact of TDM and compress it into 1 year, and we now have anecdotal evidence of the potential that they could have. Thanks.
And we know what it feels like. Yes, very true. Johann?
Yeah, so I just want to make a comment. I mean, what COVID showed us how quickly and how adaptable we are. I mean, all of a sudden, everyone changed, and we showed, we can work from home. Everyone, us transport engineers always argued the point we should try this and this, and everyone said, no, it cannot happen. And it very quickly, it showed the world how quickly we can adapt to it. And I think, so when congestion starts to happen, we'll probably see some change in behavior again of people to adapt to those conditions, because we are now capable of attending meetings virtually. We know we've learned ourselves how to adapt to conditions that we are not favorable to. So I think that will play a role. As I said, I think the challenge is to make it more of a permanent thing and not a reactive thing. To make it something like working from home, or physical TDM measures from big, large companies and those things. Yeah.
I've seen a comment by Richard Gorge, and I chucked him into this room. I didn't know how I did that, but I wanted him to maybe share his comment about what's happening in the UK. Richard, if you can quickly unmute and put on your video for a second, you spotlight it. Tell us how the UK government is handling.
Am I muted, or can you hear me?
We can hear you. Brilliant.
You might not be able to see me.
It's okay.
I don't think I'm a great connection, but yeah, I've been kind of front and center of basically in the UK over the last 18 months. We've been looking at a major road investment program, basically around kind of public transport development, active travel development, and obviously this is all happening through the year of or the year and a half so far of COVID. And therefore, all of our traffic projections are called into question. It's been a very fun time to be involved, and we've made a major attempt, as same as some of the presentations I've seen today have done, to record what's been happening over the last 12 to 15 months, and also done a whole wide range of employer-employee surveys, either web-based, and picking up a whole range of things that have been happening overseas, right across the world in terms of future kind of predictions, particularly for service. Obviously, the service sector is the sector that can work remotely, which doesn't obviously include a lot of the blue collar and the so where you're located very much depends kind of on the extent of traffic reduction you might be able to see long term. But in the work that we've been doing, we have now reduced in terms of our future modelling 2031, 2040 forecasts. We've reduced our home-based work trip matrices down by a central factor of 25% into the future, and it will be shaving off even more. Those are vehicle trips coming off, and it would be larger were it not for the fact that we don't believe that the public transport recovery is going to be complete or total. We've seen around Oxford, where I'm mainly working, we've seen 15 to 20% mode shares prior to COVID-19, and then dip right down to about 4% during the total lockdowns, and then recovering only to about 8%. And so with a trend towards more active travel and more kind of, let's say, mobility as a service, carpooling and car sharing, we don't expect regular bus-based public transport to recover to the same degree, basically to recover to pre-COVID levels ever. It's also a fascinating time, because I think we're probably about not that far ahead of South Africa, but probably 5 years or so into the recognition that we've got to stop this perpetual growth cycle that we believe that we can predict and provide. So 2020 is not going to be an outlier by any means, and the UK's their basis for forecasting is now shifting very, very significantly into a decide and provide type of approach. So the whole kind of paradigm, the philosophy is finally beginning to change. It should be changing 20 years ago, but it's starting finally to change at pace to start, applying the kind of the Dutch or the Danish or maybe the certain extent German approach of saying, what do we decide we want the city to look like, and how do we provide that, whether it be a city or whether it be a region. And it's incredibly exciting, because obviously all of the appraisal parameters, everything is up for question. So we're actually living in a time of massive uncertainty, and we've got to plan in that time. And the approach, I think Glyn Lyons from the University of West of England, it was useful. I'll refer to it after the talk, but the approach of he's actually called it decide and provide type methodology, how to plan as planners and engineers in these uncertain times. And it's a fantastic kind of a paper. But yeah, that's these shifts in terms of the modeling. We've been in this cycle for decades and decades. It suddenly dawned that things will change, and things are changing in terms of the forecasting work going forward, which is the main thing, because forecasts drive obviously the vehicle, the road capacities, which basically suck in more demand. So and that's how it goes, and that's how road engineers would like it to stay. But finally, it's shifting in the UK, and that's been brilliant. In terms of just one more point, in terms of what we've seen flows increase on an hourly basis on some of the major routes, basically because I think Johann was referring to it, that the previous congested flow situation over the 2 or 3 hour main peak has dissipated, and therefore you can actually pump more flow through. So the actual total daily trips have still been going down, but actually hourly flow rates can go up. I think Steph was also alluding to that as well. The freeway network and the major arterials are are operating much quicker at peak time, which is much better utilization of the available capacity. But when you get down to the signalized metropolitan roads, then there's not a great deal of difference in terms of travel times. So yeah, it's massive.
Wow.
Great.
Thank you for that, Richard. Yeah, so we're very close now, a couple of minutes before we got to end this, or we can ask our participants for a few more seconds. That's the fascinating, that's been a fascinating input from overseas, and I see people are dying to respond. I can tell this is almost opening a big new can of worms. Very, very interesting. We are literally 2 minutes away from past when we said this will end. What I'm going to do is, if with your permission, I'm going to ask Frederick to do his vote of thanks. Then you can carry on talking and debating, and whoever wants to listen in can listen in. And if there's anybody who desperately wants to be able to speak, I've figured out this magic button that I can zoom you into this room. So with that, I'm going to quickly hand over to Frederick to say thank you to, and before I do that, I just want to say thank you to all the participants. We've had over 220 people listening in to us, and I really, it's great that we've been able to share this information with you. I hope we're making a contribution, and thank you for everybody participating. Over to you, Frederick. You want to unmute and put on your video.
Madeleine. Yeah,
Frederick is the chair of the SAICE Transport Division.
Thank you to everyone participating, and I see all these comments in the Q and the questions in the Q&A and comments in the chat room. Morris, your question has not been answered, but if you look at that graph that just is shown, then it appears to me that heavy vehicles are going to be more or less the same growth, and it follows the graphs that we've had in the past. Just thanks to everyone, in particular Madeleine, who facilitated the discussions, filtering through all the chat and the questions. Johann preparing his presentation, and Justice presenting as well, Alan supporting. And yes, Richard, long time haven't spoken to you, for jumping in from England. Thank you very much for that input. It's great. Maybe your organization.
Working in England from South Africa.
From England. Debbie, for your organization, and like always, smooth. Sandral, for sharing your data with us. Yes, it's only on the main routes, and it's focused in 3 regions, but I think we can get a feel for what is happening. And everyone who attended, I think we all gained some insight concerning the traffic volumes and the variations as a result of COVID, from the 80% drop to nearly 90% back to where we were. It appears to me that the current volumes are more or less to remain potentially the same until the end of 2021, considering economic growth and all of those things. And I've seen some questions, but Madeleine responded to that. We will issue CPD certificates and points for you attending. So thank you very much for that. Can I just summarize my takeout from today?
It's quick.
Just three lessons. 3 lessons. Principle 1, it's back to basics. Johann refers to the sound engineering judgment comment. He mentioned plan, design, using appropriate data, all of those things. Alan reminded us that we don't design for just 1 year, we design for 20 years and longer. It appears to me that some of these graphs look like my investments. Before 2020, it had a certain trend, and now in 2021, it has a similar trend. So it looks like 2020, as Richard mentioned, we just need to ignore that. Principle 2, involve your client and other stakeholders in your planning and design processes. We as engineers must stick to the basics. Principle 3, let's share our lessons. Start with the end in mind. 20 years from now, later, ask the question, how would our new cities look? Where will people work? What will happen in the economy? Then we work backwards. Thank you. I think that is very much what I took out. Just short advertisement from the SAICE Transport Division. The recording will be shared. We share it in a YouTube format, so it is very small, and you can load it onto your cell phone, and you can show all the people all the graphs around the braai. Our website is extremely user-friendly at the moment, and I suggest that you share some articles. We have a knowledge share portal there. Maybe there may be interesting articles to share. Please send them to Debbie at saice.org.za. Debbie is the one who will send you also the CPD certificates. Thank you very much for your attendance. Stay safe until next time. I think next time we need to ask the question, what is the change in public transport and the impact of the reduction in rail passengers? I don't want to create expectations. Stay well until we see you next time. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Yes, that is definitely our next session. It's going to be about that. But yeah. Okay, everybody. Those who want to drop off, cheers. Those who want to hang on, we're going to continue this debate, I think, a little bit, because I can see Alan and Johann ready to respond. And if there's anybody who is desperately wanting to be zoomed into this room, just give me a chat. And I'm going to turn on another virtual screen now that's reflecting where I think we should all be. In a pub celebrating St. Patrick's Day. Okay, cheers.
Well, Madeleine, in that case, I suggest people who are at home should open a
glass of wine.
No, it's St. Patrick's
Guinness.
Day. A Guinness. Let's open a Guinness and enjoy ourselves. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending, and the great spirit of attendance. Thank you very much.
Yeah. It's been fun. There you go. More Guinness.
That's Madeleine. That's one thing we haven't adapted to is virtual going to a bar. I mean, we still need to.
Okay. Yeah, Johann, you wanted to respond to Richard's provoking, interesting point, which I agree with. But yeah.
No, but I can see there's an underlying topic that filters from all sides, and that is other modes of transport. We talk now about private, vehicular transport. The impact, as Frederick said, the impact of rail and the modal shift that people did during COVID from public transport to private transport. And whether we can recover back to increase the public transport modal share. I think that is a huge debate and a big uncertainty.
And a thorn.
Yeah, definitely. So you can't look at these data sets without including other modes, because 50% of people are reliant on that, or was reliant on that.
Justice, you nodding your head. Oh, Alan. For Alan.
Hi, thanks. I think when it comes to public transport, firstly, it's the rail. It may not seem like that massive to us, but it's still a very big, or it used to be a very big mover of people, and that has collapsed throughout COVID. It will take a while for rail to recover. Taxis have somehow taken over from that. And then people experience taxis and they decide it's about time to buy a car. So we have that vicious cycle. And in South African context, it's different. Majority of people on taxis are there because they are captive to that transport mode. It's not a choice mode. I think it was only the Western Cape and KZN that had people who were on rail by choice, and not because their economic circumstances were forcing them. In Gauteng, it's captured market, and in other parts of the country as well. So I'm not sure if I have a quick answer to that, but what I've learned today is that context matters, or context is key. So we need to look at our circumstances and say, what is the environment around us telling us? Can we take those lessons from this place or that province or that particular road and apply them to this specific circumstance that I'm facing? Thanks.
Alan, you've got a comment.
I just want to come back to what Richard was saying. Correct. except that's called in the ideal world. We're looking at this one. And I'll tell you where the differences are. What to support what he was saying is the only time you can have a change is when you're in a crisis. Somebody said years ago at a conference that we will only start to think differently when we're in gridlock. My comment was, well, let's bring on gridlock because we've got to start thinking differently. And COVID has shown that we can think differently. Unfortunately, we need to market it because the number of companies where they said work from home and as these restrictions are lifted, I mean, we're just getting our SOPs to say, right, get back to work. Yet we've been functioning quite fine for the last year with a lot of us working remotely. But I think it's that inertia to get comfortable with a permanent situation. I think there's a large number of companies who, let's say, still run by some of us old guys who like to see everybody in an office. So unfortunately, I think we're going to miss an opportunity. But anyway, that's the one thing. The only other difference is that where I struggle with is if I look at our master plans and our road improvement plans, I'd hate to say what percentage is built by the private sector and developers. You know, and if we look at metropolitan road improvements, provincial road improvements over the last 10, 15 years, I mean, it's almost ground to a halt. And that is where the driving for this change must come from. You know, I mean, from Sanwell's point of view, we're looking at mobility on the major roads. So we're just creating and trying to promote long distance mobility and safety, which, as we all know, promotes the use of private cars. Which is, so that on the one hand, we're trying to do the right thing. On the other hand, it's having a consequence, which is probably not a good idea. You know, I think we need to start. We need to start thinking of how do we improve the metropolitan networks to try and promote a shorter distance trip. Because effectively, as I say, whatever you build, you need to decide what you need first and build towards it, as opposed to keep doing what we've been doing and hope for something different. Yeah, and that means integration of public and private transport. Yeah, again, there's a complete mind shift, but unfortunately, for the foreseeable future in this country, we're going to keep doing what we have been doing. And even though we all hope for a different result, I think Einstein said ain't going to happen.
What do you think? No, I've got a second mute button. What do you so Richard commented about this thing, and I've heard it many times being used overseas, that we've got to stop doing predict and provide, but much more decide and provide. And it's a mentality that I don't feel is yet common in South Africa. We tend to still think we predict. When we say how many lanes do we need, Justice also said we could have saved lanes. Do we say, like you say, Alan, bring on gridlock, and what do we do? Johann, comment, or Alan, or who wants to comment?
Yeah,
Johann's hand was up.
If I can quickly, I think where we've generally missed an opportunity was to increase NMT infrastructure in cities during COVID lockdown situations, where we had the opportunity, where there was a significant reduction in traffic volumes. I always thought, you know, why don't we just block off one lane in a city and use it for pedestrians and cyclists? And when people and start to create that habit, because we are creatures of habit, unfortunately. That's why you see all the graphs going back to normal. So if we blocked off those lanes and created, I think other cities like Paris, they've done similar things. So that, you know, when people come back, then that alternative is there. It's already there. It's not a prediction that we're going to create something. It is then a decisive way of forcing or increasing pedestrianization and NMT movement in cities. Because there was an opportunity to do that, because you wouldn't affect anyone by doing it at that time.
Yeah, and then you could have left it to stay, and that could have been how it is now. And then it would have been harder to return to normal. Yeah, missed opportunity. That's very unfortunate, but I think it's missed. That's what it is. Alan?
But sorry, Madeleine. So obviously there's a challenge for cities to react so quickly. We know how difficult it is to build infrastructure at such short time, but maybe that's what municipalities also need to adapt to, and legislation.
Yeah.
Red tape.
Alan? I'm actually no longer going to facilitate. I think this is just open now.
I don't think it was a missed opportunity. I think it's a highlight. But at any time. And I think that's the whole difference, is decide and provide. Is if we've shown, if this has shown that this is an opportunity that we can pursue, you need to decide, and we just do it anyway. You know, because as I say, COVID was a forced reduction in supply due to, I'd say, availability of the network to people who are only essential services. I'm not saying it was, you can debate whether it was a reduction in demand or a reduction in supply. For the most part, COVID has been a reduction in supply. I mean, people still wanted to do what they did before. It's just you can't. So, but what it does show is there is the ability to adapt. Now, all we've got to do is decide, exactly like they're doing everywhere else, is decide what we want, and then, unfortunately, then the municipalities have to stick their hands in the pocket and start providing this infrastructure. You're not going to get a big developer who wants to build a mall and then, you know, predominantly pedestrian, because nobody's going to walk that far. So it's still going to be focused on cars, and they're the guys who are providing the infrastructure. So, you know, unless we can turn that around and get the municipalities and the provinces to provide that seed infrastructure, to show that it works, and to demonstrate the benefits, the guys with the money, which are your developers, are just going to carry on doing the same thing. I mean, we're looking at you know, applications for malls and everything, exactly the same. We all want to be walking and everything, but again, I mean, look at our latest one, Mall of Africa. I mean, the only pedestrian access is the most dangerous thing in the world, because you've got to cross multiple traffic lanes in very short distances. You know, it's just not friendly unless we start changing that attitude. You know, Santon City's got what, 2 pedestrian accesses on massive blocks. How are you supposed to walk to it without going through a car park? You've got to think differently. And I think it's what Richard was saying. We've got to change that attitude.
Yeah, I think the decide and provide.
Take control.
The decide and provide is multifaceted. You can't decide on just letting congestion go. But Richard also asked if he can say something, so I brought him back here. I zoomed him back. But you have to have other follow through to make other modes and other things possible, or whatever. Richard, I've zoomed you in here again.
Am I unmuted, or can you hear me?
No, we can hear you. So
Fascinating.
So you are in Stellenbosch, right? Working in the UK.
Yeah, I've been back here in Stellenbosch for a full year now. But so yeah, I mean, it's possible, as we all know, but it's quite difficult when you're so far away from site. Some things do slow down, and contractual issues do kind of protract. But I very much agree with what Alan and Johann have been saying in response to the comment that I made, that I was painting a picture of the UK, and kind of a refreshing picture that I'm seeing change there happening. And that was my home country that I left quite some time ago, and it was very stuck. and change takes time. But Alan's absolutely right. If you don't have institutions that can provide the right framework in which you can actively decide and then shape how things are going to happen, then it's left to the private sector. Here we are. Here we're sitting in South Africa with a, with an institutional decline that we're not sure we can ever recover from. So it's a bit doom and gloom from one perspective. So, the things that have been happening in the UK, the changing appraisal parameters, that's all, central and local government focused. There's a lot of energy, a lot of talent going into that. Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. And then secondly, the kind of the development contribution towards transport has changed quite dramatically. So the Section 106 provisions where, you've got a planning permission to be able to develop, then your contributions back to transport are very different from what they used to be when it was provide access into the development, and don't stuff up the wider network, to now funds held, basically held in abeyance, and the local authorities then, through a local planning process, decide how that money is then focused, which is much more about trying to promote effective accessibility, if you like, as opposed to how to ensure that the flows can get in and out of the closest road connection. So without an effective public sector to drive this, that's where we are. That's where we're at. How do we reshape things when we've got such an institutional kind of gap in the middle? Yeah, that's our issue. Maybe we've got to start turning to local and recognizing that local community involvement in smaller scale initiatives can actually, can ripple to be something much bigger. Thanks, Madeleine. Sorry, I'm always long on time.
That's why I keep zooming you out. No, I'm joking.
Yeah,
Justice, you can talk. Hand up. Your hand is up. Go for it. It's like a...
You can hear me now? Okay. I think speeches can do a lot to try and force change. For example, there's no requirement for travel plans or green travel plans in South Africa, and that will force corporates to start thinking about flexible work environment, which can change the peak and the times of travel. Public transport can become more optimal in terms of, or more efficient, because that interpeak travel, they can get more demand if people are flexible. But there's no requirement for that. It's all voluntary on what people want to do. So simple things like that, the contribution policies, for example, I know some municipalities are starting to change that to include contributions towards public transport and active transport. We need to start seeing more of that. So there are things that people can do to force change. There are things that government can do in terms of policies. So saying from next year, this time, if you are applying for this license to do a business, you must prepare travel plans for your employees, and there must be percentages and targets for green transport, for ride sharing, for public transport usages, and you must measure that. So those are things that can change behavior in the long term. Thanks.
Any other comments?
My comment would be, these are not new problems we have. We're trying to, I think the difficulty, first of all, is to align visions between practitioners, road authorities, municipalities, and all that. I mean, we as speaking as a consultant, we can only react to a tender that was put out by a municipality. To some degree, you can obviously influence through these forums. I would love to hear some, officials' response from a municipality. How it can change these type of visions. but that's the difficulty. I mean, we a little bit fragmented in how we can approach, the same outcome.
See, we've got a few officials like Daisy. We asked one of the questions we didn't answer, and I think if you answer it now, maybe it'll go through in the recording. What are the panelists' views on SITs? And I wasn't sure what a SIT is. SITs. Nobody else knows what it means. Okay. Daniel Wepener. So this is okay. So we also don't know. Then somebody asked, how is this data important, particularly since it reflects lockdown? But I think the reason was because we want to understand what the impact of lockdown is and how close to normal are we. That's really what we wanted to understand. Something about heavy vehicle design. Yeah, I don't know. That's a big question for Morris de Beer that I think somebody should answer maybe separately. Because I think we've gone through all the questions. Other than that, there's nobody else an opinion. I still wish we had all the answers and we could have used the the whole lockdown to generate a whole different dynamic in our transport system. And like you say, take away lanes, doing real tactical urbanism. We could have had benefits to it. But we have to end this because Debbie needs to go as well. And it's been fun. It's been so much fun. I see we still have now 87 people listening to us. There's somebody had a hand, but the hand's been dropped. So yeah. Oh, there's still one hand. Let me just see who that is. I find it difficult to figure out. It's Gordon and Adrian. I'm going to bring them in quickly. Debbie, I think you can stop the recording, Debbie, or please stop the recording and you can exit.